Hi, welcome to this demo of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus version 10.1.7 on Microsoft Azure. Spectrum Protect Plus is now available to be deployed automatically from the Microsoft Azure Marketplace into either a new or existing vNet. And Spectrum Protect Plus can be deployed either in a hybrid model where the Spectrum Protect Plus server is installed in the customer's environment and a vSnap is installed inside of Microsoft Azure. Or it can be installed as an all-on-cloud solution where both the Spectrum Protect Plus server and vSnap are installed directly into Microsoft Azure. Now, both of these give you the ability to protect and reuse database workloads on Azure, and they provide a replication target for your on-premise vSnap repositories. I'm going to be demoing a all-on-cloud deployment with a new vNet, and you can see what that layout looks like inside of Azure here. I'll also be carving out some new blob storage for which we can utilize the Spectrum Protect Plus server to do a offload for long-term retention. The other model that I'll be pointing out as I go through is a hybrid model where you would have an existing Spectrum Protect Plus server in your corporate environment, and then you would just be installing a vSnap server into the Azure cloud to protect the database and VM instances out there. Okay, with that, let's go ahead and get started. First, go to the Microsoft Azure Marketplace, and if you search for Spectrum Protect Plus, that will bring up our offering. If you click on this result, it will drill down into additional information. The first thing you'll notice is there are some links to YouTube videos if you want to learn more about Spectrum Protect Plus. And of course, you can always go out directly to my YouTube channel and find all kinds of information on getting started with Spectrum Protect Plus. Notice the tabs covering the overview, plans, usage information, and support. The plans gives you details about the licensing. This is a bring your own licensing, so you'll have purchased that license inside of Passport Advantage. We also do offer a 30-day free trial on the software. The next piece, if you go into usage information, you'll see these useful links. The first thing you'll want to do before deploying this is take a look at the deployment guide, which does have information about the broad picture of what the solution is, as well as architectural charts on how the layout will look. The second thing you'll want to take a look at is the Spectrum Protect Plus blueprints. And this is critical that you go through this sizing tool in order to make sure that what you deploy is going to correctly fit your needs for data protection. I have videos available on my YouTube showing how to utilize this sizer, and the output you get from this sizer is going to be critical because you're going to use that to correctly choose your setup inside of Azure. So once you've decided if you're going to do a hybrid or all-in-cloud solution and you've sized that solution, go ahead and click Create. This takes you to the Spectrum Protect Plus Azure Resource Management template. You'll see that the install is going to be broken into 5 segments: the basics, your networking, your IBM Spectrum Protect Plus server configuration, your vSnap server configuration, and finally review and create. The first thing you'll do on this basic screen is choose the type of subscription you want to utilize. I selected an Enterprise Development and Test Plan. The next thing you're going to create is a resource group, and a resource group acts kind of like a folder where we're going to install all of the different resources and components into. You can either choose to create a new resource group, or you can use an existing resource group, but that resource group has to be empty. So we're going to go ahead and create a new one. Next, you'll choose the region where this instance will be installed into. It is critical that this region supports the v4 VM type. And in order to check that, you'll need to go out to this web page and make sure Azure has rolled out ESv4 series support for that region. If it has not yet rolled out for that region, you will need to choose a different region, as Spectrum Protect Plus installation will fail if ESv4 series is not supported in that region. I chose West US 2 as my region. Next, you'll need to enter a name for the template. You choose the name for this template, however, spaces are not supported in the template name. The instances to deploy field is where you'll choose if you're doing an all-on-cloud install of both the Spectrum Protect Plus server and vSnap, or a hybrid install where we're just installing the vSnap inside of Azure. If you are doing the all-on-cloud install, you will need at least 16 cores in your quota. This is because the Spectrum Protect Plus server requires 8 and the vSnap requires 8. So you might have to contact Azure and ask them to extend your quota. The SSH administrator account is used for maintenance. It's going to manage all 3 of the VM server credentials that we're deploying for this all-in-cloud environment. That'll be the SPP server, the vSnap server, and the Bastion server. So you will need to choose a name for this SSH user. I'm using server admin. Next, you'll have to choose an authentication type, which can either be password or SSH public key. If you choose the SSH public key, you do need to create a new key in the Azure portal. So from your Azure portal, you'll want to enter SSH key and then add an SSH key. Click on Create SSH Key. You will need to enter a resource group that this is going to belong to, and this has to be the same resource group that we created initially for the Spectrum Protect Plus resources to be stored in. Enter the region, then give the key pair a name. Click on Review and Create. Once the information has been validated, you'll get a green banner showing it's been validated. You can click Create. And then you'll want to download that private key to your computer. Once that's downloaded, you'll go back into the SSH keys. You'll click on that newly created key. You'll copy the public key, go back to the Spectrum Protect Plus template, and paste in that public key. So at this point, you could use the SSH public key. However, we want to go ahead and use a password. So we're going to click Password. Now notice when you enter the password, Azure has very specific password rules that have to be followed, and you'll see those rules on the right-hand side. Now, in addition to those rules, you also have to follow the Spectrum Protect Plus rules, which are listed below. And even though Azure can't check for the validity of all of the Spectrum Protect Plus password rules, you have to make sure that those rules are being followed. Otherwise, the install will fail. So once you've created those passwords and confirmed them, go ahead and click Next. On the networking page, you'll first need to decide if you want to use a new or existing vNet. If you are creating a new vNet and you are doing a hybrid install, you will have to manually define your Spectrum Protect Plus vSnap that we deploy into Azure to your Spectrum Protect Plus server, which is on site. We're going to go ahead and use this net01. You will also have to choose a private and public subnet, and then enter your remote access CIDR, and this will determine which IPs you want to block. Now we're using the 0.0.0.0/0, and this is not very secure, so you'll definitely want to put in your own CIDR. Do note that you have to use that / followed by a number in order to define the network class. Once this is complete, go ahead and click Next. On the Spectrum Protect Plus server page, enter the Spectrum Protect Plus username and password. If this is a hybrid install, enter the existing Spectrum Protect Plus server administrator and password. Otherwise, if this is an all-in-cloud install, enter a new username and password for your Spectrum Protect Plus server. You will need to remember these credentials because you're going to need them in order to log on to the Spectrum Protect Plus server console, because for an all-in-cloud install, we do not use the default Spectrum Protect Plus server ID and password. Go ahead and click Next. For this vSnap server configuration page, you will need the size and dedupe setting you decided on from your blueprints that I talked about in the first screen. So you will first select your vSnap server repository size, and the minimum size is 512 gigabytes. Next, you'll choose if you're planning on enabling dedupe. The server repository size and the dedupe will then bring up a list of pre-configured vSnap server machine types for you to select from. And notice all of these are the v4 machine type that we talked about when we selected the region. So once again, if your region where we're deploying this to does not yet support v4, this installation will fail. So go ahead and choose your Azure model, which will be a combo of core and RAM, and will correlate to your vSnap size and dedupe choice. Next, you'll need to choose the disk type where the vSnap storage will be installed, and these selections will give you a choice of different performance and cost models. Next, enter the username and password for your vSnap server. All of the fields that are required have a red asterisk next to them. You'll notice the offload to blob container is optional. If you enter a blob container name, this install will create that name and it will define that to Spectrum Protect Plus server so that you can then create an SLA to offload your data from your vSnap to the less expensive blob container storage. If this is a hybrid install into a new vNet, you will need to manually define that blob storage to the Spectrum Protect Plus server. Okay, go ahead and click Next. You'll see at the top of the screen that it's validating the information you just entered, and once it's complete, you'll get a validate passed. At this point, if you want, you could click on Download a Template for Automation if you wanted to save that for a later installation. We're going to go ahead and click Create. The installation will take about 15 minutes. In the upper right-hand corner, you'll see the status of the installation. And if you click on this, it'll drill down to give you more details about the deployment. It is during this process that if you did not have enough cores allocated, that the install would fail, or if you chose a region that didn't support the v4 virtual machines, it would also fail. You can see that we're deploying different resource templates like a Bastion Jump server, a Spectrum Protect Plus server, the vSnap. We're also setting up the disks, the networking, and the blob storage. You can also look at the resource group that we created for this installation and drill down into it to see the different components that are being installed into that resource group. If you click on the headers, you can sort these resources. So for instance, if you click on Type, you can easily identify the virtual machines that are being installed. If you click on the Spectrum Protect Plus server, you can see the internal IP that's being utilized in this secured environment. And this is the IP we can connect to via the Bastion server or via a VPN. If you look inside of the Bastion server, you'll see the external IP, and this is going to be the only server in our environment that has an external IP to connect through that we can then use to tunnel into the Spectrum Protect Plus server. If you search on network security groups, you will see that we have 3 security groups that are linked to our Spectrum Protect Plus resource group. And this is going to be for our Bastion server, our Spectrum Protect Plus server, and our vSnap. If you drill down into any of these, you will see the specifics on who is able to access those different servers. Our deployment is now complete, and we can expand these different areas to see the deployment details. If you did have any problems during the install, you could go into the Azure Monitor Activity Log and look for any specific errors that occurred during the installation. In fact, you can sort on them, for instance, on failed deployments or alerts. And if you drill down into these errors, you can drill down to the specific occurrence. And once you're in that occurrence, if you keep clicking through, you can actually go down and look at JSON code to get very specific about what the error was. Okay, but our install was successful. So what we're going to do now is we're going to show you how to connect to the Spectrum Protect Plus server via the Bastion server. First, go back into the Spectrum Protect Plus Bastion server and copy the public IP address. open up a Windows PowerShell, and you're going to issue the command SSH space -D space 1080 space the server administrator name that you created for the SSH, which we called server admin, at, and then you're going to paste in that IP address. You're then going to enter the password that you gave for this SSH administrator when you did the install. And then once you hit enter, it'll go ahead and set it up so that all the communications will go through the Bastion server. Next thing you need to do is copy the Spectrum Protect Plus internal IP address, so this private IP address. You're then going to go out to Firefox or your web browser, and you're going to need to edit the properties. So go into Options and then go into your network settings. And inside of this network settings, you're going to set your manual proxy configuration as the default, and then you're going to make sure the SOCKS host is localhost, and then with the port that we specified on the SSH command that we just issued, which was 1080. Click OK. Okay, and now if you enter the Spectrum Protect Plus server IP address, you'll see that that'll take us out to the Azure cloud, and we will be able to access the Spectrum Protect Plus server. You'll need to log on with the Spectrum Protect Plus administrator username and password that you defined when we were doing the setup. We can now look at the configurations we did for the Spectrum Protect Plus server sitting out in the Azure cloud. Go to System Config, Backup Storage, Disk. You will see the vSnap that we also defined out in Azure, and then defined that to the Spectrum Protect Plus server. Go to System Configurations, Backup Storage, Object Storage. You'll see the Azure Blob Storage defined. This can be used to offload your backups to less expensive disks for longer retention periods. And finally, if you go to Manage Protection, Policy Overview, you'll see that we created a new SLA policy called Azure Policy that references the new vSnap and the new blob storage. So it's now up to the Spectrum Protect administrator to define workloads and assign those to SLAs, as well as to upgrade the Spectrum Protect Plus server software and vSnap software as needed, and add additional vSnap storage as required. So in summary, I've showed you how to utilize Azure Marketplace to automatically deploy a Spectrum Protect Plus server and vSnap all in cloud. I also showed you how to tunnel through using the Bastion server so that you can connect to that Spectrum Protect Plus server. Thank you very much.